Welcome to another exciting book club. We're still reading Learning True Love, Practicing Buddhism in a Time of War. We are on chapters 17 through 23 today. And a lot of stuff happens in these chapters.
Hello, I'm a professional book club member, participating professionally. All right,
Professional
let's
book club.
go.
Professional book club member.
Oh, I'm not being paid for it now that I'm realizing. Never mind. Let's just move on.
You can
Let's
be a professional volunteer. That's fine.
That's fair.
Um, a lot of stuff happens in these chapters. I think you said it well earlier, Bala, is that it's almost really nice to read these together because there is a big contrast with the earlier chapters and the later chapters in this segment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's so different even, and it's amazing to me how many experiences Sean Khan goes through that by the end of this segment I had almost forgotten about the boat people when I was reading.
Oh, I see.
Because here in chapter 17, we're introduced to the refugees leaving Vietnam, and they're trying to get on land, trying to go to these new places to get away, and um, the realities of that.
See, now reading this book actually made me realize I kind of missed a whole entire like chunk from my own home country because Czechoslovakia actually has a very large Vietnamese minority.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they would basically offer like work opportunity to people, and actually a lot of Vietnamese moved in, and then they basically formed this. They would be basically become street vendors and sell like all sorts of usually bootleg stuff. And so if you say shopping at the Vietnamese or Vietnamese like in Czech Republic, this is like the image people will conjure immediately.
Oh,
Uh, and I do not know exactly the history and why precisely this happened and how. Uh, but yeah, that's a thing. And I think after actually the revolution, when the country kind of opened up some more, there were many more people who immigrated. So I think the Vietnamese is actually the largest minority by now. And I even read that
wow.
apparently like the typical Vietnamese surname Nguyen is like number 9 in the country in popularity, which is crazy.
Huh.
But anyway, sorry, that's derailment. Let's focus on the book.
I think that's really interesting information, though, to really tie this whole book together to the reality that we're in the present. That's really I don't know. I find that fascinating, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Um, so let me get this lovely poem that Thak Nan Thak Thak. I'm so bad at names. I will one day really sit down and study the pronunciation of these names,
good luck.
and I will be so good at it. So Thay writes this lovely poem about witnessing the people on the high seas as they're like awaiting their permission or their visas to get on land. Um, and I like this little segment where it's like, you stay up very late tonight, brothers, because the boat people on the high seas are not certain at all that mankind exists.
Hmm.
And I thought it was a really beautiful insight to like what must be going on for the boat people, and just
Yeah, that's very well put.
I don't know,
Yeah,
it just struck
yeah.
me.
I kind of stopped at that as well. I was like, yeah, yeah. They write about like there would be like what 60 people in a boat and 62 in another, and
Yeah.
and
So
the
and then one boat.
the others just like die and drown because
Yeah.
the boat has a failure. It's
Yeah.
absolutely awful.
Fortunately, even though some of these places were being really difficult about letting the refugees into the land, at least some of them, it looks like, took precautions to fix the ships so they'd stay afloat
Hmm.
when they got nearby, even if it meant kicking them back into the ocean, which I know is a small consolation prize, but I was like, well, that is the least you could do, I guess.
Mm.
Um, but really, like as you read and just the words that we hear of the reality of like people are drowning every day because they're not allowed to get on land, and I was like, that is so wild to me that you would see somebody like wading in water and you would say, nah, you're not coming on this land.
See, but that hasn't changed much, since then, right? Like you still have the refugee crisis and people on boats. Like that's that's still a problem.
It is still a problem, but it's still, that's one of those things that I'm
But
so
yeah, yeah,
disconnected from. It's just crazy to me that it exists at all. You know what I mean?
it
This
is
is
crazy. Yeah.
I suppose this is where I'm reflecting on my own disconnect, right, from this sort of suffering, where I've been privileged to not have to be a refugee into these sort of spaces and in this way.
Yeah, I don't have my head completely wrapped around. Like I understand why countries protect their borders, right, and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But like this is pretty extreme, conclusion of that sort of effort. It just makes no sense.
Right.
So,
So they raise a lot of money. See, look how many people are on that boat. That's crazy.
yeah, it's just completely
It's
packed.
really packed. Like they're packed full. They're not it's not like a roomy cruise ship where everybody's got their own separate rooms. It's like there are sardines in there.
Right, and the other thing is like look just how crazy their operation is. Like, she was writing that they bought a ship for 100 grand.
Oh wow.
Then they got like a tanker. Like this is not small stuff anymore, right?
Mhm.
And he's responsible or feels responsible for like what was it, 568 if I remember correctly the number,
Mhm.
566, like a huge amount of people, right? And
Yeah.
those are kind of your responsibility. Like she does all that, so it's
I,
just terrifying.
I continue to be amazed at Shang Kong as a person, not just as like a Buddhist or as
Mm.
a member of of the Vietnamese population, but just as a human being, the amount of compassion and drive to help and like relieve, not just prevent suffering, but relieve it when it's in action is just so inspiring, I think. And
True, she basically doesn't stop and like writing personal letters to people and like doing like
mhm,
all these things. And the thing is like one thing that made me a little bit, well, not necessarily sad. She actually expresses it later in the book, right?
mhm,
But like you can go to Plum Village and it's beautiful and stuff, and like there's this like insane history behind all that and all the people, and you don't see it. You have no
yeah,
clue, right?
right. You just go and you're having a good time, and that history
Yep,
is
yep. Drink some tea.
mhm.
Ah, Techie's here.
Techie,
Hey!
welcome to exciting book club time.
I mean, it's got a beautiful jingle. How bad could it be?
um,
Very
well,
professional.
I mean, I don't know everybody's sensibilities. I think it's worth giving people warnings when certain topics are being discussed. It doesn't hurt me to do that, you know?
Yes, exactly. And if people, it's one of those things where it's going to be a win-win because if people don't care, good, just ignore it. And if people do care, well, good job you did.
Yeah. I did the reasonable minimal amount of effort to make sure people can avoid things that hurt them. So there you
Hmm.
go.
So, how are we doing? I know I'm jumping in part way.
Oh, we're just getting started, really. We're discussing the boat people. Did you have an opportunity to look over the chapters this time?
As per the tradition, I did not, but
Okay,
I'm mainly here for the because it's a good way to get me to go and look at it. So it's the
sure,
inverse relation.
sure, whatever works. Uh,
Oh, this is so funny. You have the same thing highlighted as I did.
oh, good.
Same thing. It's like the official said we have their names on a list, like whoop de doo, right?
Yeah. So,
Otherwise, have no clue what's going on here.
yeah. So, Techie,
Mhm.
during this time in Sean Kong's life, the in the Vietnam War and everything, there are so many people fleeing from Vietnam to other countries. They get nicknamed the boat people because many of them are stranded on boats near shores until they are awarded visas. But the visa number counts are starting out so low that many of them are either stuck at sea for months just outside of the shores or are drowning in the water.
That's not fantastic.
It's not fantastic. And it's really a dark time, and once again our not our protagonist, our author, our the Sean Kong, she's presented with this, and her team team
Yep.
I'm gonna call it her team
YFS.
go into action to try to raise money to help these people, get them food, get them, and then kind of lobby for them a little bit with the governments to try to get more visas available for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
A wonderful
just,
thing.
it's
They
bad
get to.
times.
The year is 1975, and the communists have
Oh god.
won. War is over, which basically means that the misery can start for real now,
Mm-hmm.
apparently.
Should be
Uh,
a tagline.
yeah. What did you say?
It should be a tagline. The misery can start for real now.
The misery can start for real now.
Yeah. Well, it is nice to see that when life is given lemons, they are going out and trying to do good in the world.
Absolutely. And I was just saying how inspired I am by this woman, this Buddhist nun who
Mm-hmm.
just time and time again is thrown obstacles and always meets it with such an open heart of like, all right, but what's next? What are we going to do about it?
Yes. Very practical.
Very practical. And I'm not saying she's perfect. I think she herself would easily admit faults. Were presented many times where she loses her temper and kind of regrets a decision. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not that by being at this level, if you will, that she somehow surpassed, you know, these human flaws, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's still prone to bouts of temper and issue,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately just continues to go back to the practice and what are we going to do about this? How do we relieve this suffering? Can we relieve this suffering? What does it take to do that? And I just find that so awesome.
Yes. People are allowed to screw up every now and then, but if you're
Yes.
trying to do a good thing, like you could be a lot more forgiving.
Yeah. Um, And so what Balo was saying is that we both noted this interaction with some government officials where the government was getting mad at Sean Kong's group for helping the refugees. They're like, hey, that's our business. What are you doing? And they answered, you don't feed, clothe, or do anything for them. How could we know they were in your care? And the officials
Hmm.
are just like, we have their names on a list.
It's not
Yep.
really helping them.
Cool.
Well,
But
yeah.
that's what
I,
you got like even today, right? Like she has direct experiential knowledge of the situation of the people and everything, right? And government has prehistory,
Right.
basically, that everything is fine, and posture and everything, right? But it doesn't matter ultimately.
I am surprised the government weren't pleased that they were getting some help. I wonder what their motive was for that.
Mm-hmm. Their
Well,
motive is to not look bad on the world stage, I think.
precisely. Yeah.
Mm.
I think that time again, that's what we're presented with from this perspective, right? Is just seeing governments act out of the how will this make me look to the other governments kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
We don't want them to
Which
think we're
is
doing a bad job or we're not good enough.
it's related to a thing I bring up time and time again, which is a little prediction Plato made many many years ago with
Mm-hmm.
the issue with the form of democracy that we have nowadays. And I'm not suggesting we should get rid of it because we've got to think of a better idea first. But one of the issues with it is it can very easily devolve into popularism
Yeah.
or just showing because the motive isn't always to help people, even
Mhm.
though it looks like it on paper. It's to get back in power.
Mhm.
Cynical as that may sound. Mm.
I think
So,
this is funny you mentioned that because I think later in the chapters there's like a particular form of democracy they set up in the Plum Village. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
mhm,
That kind of goes a little bit to this.
mhm.
Hello.
Chris is listening.
Hi, Chris. Um, so this part I highlighted actually is another point where we see the human side of her walk, of where she's like, looking back, I see that if I could have remained silent when I was fired from this project, I could have secretly raised funds and been able to transport the 566 boat people to Australia. But when I lost my calm, I did not act in the wisest way. And so this insight into this very human failing, I think, is very important for the reader. These moments where we realize the fallibility of our speaker, our narrator, because otherwise
Mhm,
I think it's really easy to fall in this trap of like, well, look how good they are.
mhm.
How could
Look
I
at this
ever?
master of all things.
Yeah, they don't struggle with mere mortal things, not like I do, right? And it's easy to begin to separate yourself from the narrator.
Yeah, this must have been completely horrible for her because she basically kind of undermined, those over 500 people,
Mhm.
essentially just by being proud,
Mhm.
right? She's just like, well, if you do this, well, I'll just raise double the amount of money and screw you, right?
Mhm.
And then she got expelled basically, had to
Right.
leave within 48 hours. Yep.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So she let pride get in the way, and I think we're all guilty of that. I know I am. I
Mhm.
often think I'm the only one who knows how to do a thing, or I'm the only one who can do it right, and I let that get in the way of actually doing good.
It's a common thing. Tangent time. Um, in so context, I'm a software engineer, and
Mhm.
a lot of the time when you've got new people coming in, one of the things they struggle with is trusting other people's work
Mhm.
because they're in this like they can struggle to let other people do things. They don't think they're going to do it properly because they've only come to trust their own abilities. Because perhaps in university settings, um, the whole group project dynamic happens, and there's one person dragging the group sometimes, and
Mhm.
I wonder if that's what fuels it. But it's definitely a common thing in my experience for people to be like nervous about letting someone else do something for them, and it's interesting to think about where does that come from because
Mhm.
they're a person like you and they're saying they can do it like you.
Mhm. Uh.
It's like the not invented here syndrome.
That is definitely related, yes.
Yeah. There's another factor to it, but let's not get into software engineering. But yeah, I see your point. I see your point.
Well, and just in a more day to day aspect, you have people who are forced to be ultra independent much faster than they probably should have growing up, and that in turn can
Mm-hmm.
play a role in how they've internalized the dynamic between themselves and other quote unquote capable people. I
Mm-hmm.
myself, I struggle with that because my biological mother often struggled to be the competent adult,
Mm-hmm.
and so I overcompensated, and now I have an inflated sense of my own ability to do things over other people
Because you've had to do it.
because I've just had to do it like all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this and I think it's really easy to miss the ways that this can slip into our everyday world, right? I catch myself being incapable of trusting other people's abilities to complete a task
Mm-hmm.
in almost every area.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Yeah.
anyway, once again, I say that all to say that I appreciate these moments where I feel I can extra relate to her
Mm-hmm.
and just, but know that despite a mistake, she picked it up and said, well, what can I do from here? How can I
Yes.
fix it?
That's probably more admirable than anything else. Just
Yeah.
saying that I screwed up and I'm just going to try and do better.
Yeah.
And relating what you said to individualism back again, one of the things that I've personally felt, and I've spoken to other people that seem to feel it, is with this individualism comes and this thing where you trust yourself to do something also comes the weight of responsibility.
Mhm.
I remember talking to a therapist once, and I was just talking to the therapist about how racism was bothering me, right?
Mhm.
And it was, what do there's only so much one person can do, and it's like, yes, and you're trying to do it all yourself, and you're not going to do that. It's like, I know this, but I want to do it anyway.
I know. Exactly. Yes.
Maybe the two are coupled. Maybe there's a balance in between somewhere.
Oh, there's
Something
always a
sits in the middle way.
balance. Almost every time, the answer for me when I'm having these deep conversations with people is somewhere in the middle. It's always somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So, anyway. Oh gosh. So, so many issues. I don't necessarily want to rehash every single historical event that happened. But so yeah, eventually they get on a boat and they help people in the community that their sweet potato community from our last segment. We talked about them. Uh,
Hmm.
starts you know dispersing materials to to spread information and insight into what's going on. Um,
Just a moment.
mhm.
On this page,
Yep.
she is actually like shockingly resourceful. Like she's like, oh, I flew back to Thailand and disguised myself as the owner of a fishing boat. Right? It takes this like false identity and just does this.
Yeah.
And there's many places like this when she just does
Yeah.
something like extremely clever, and I have no idea how she figured all that out, or if it's a help of the community or just, but it's crazy.
She's like,
Like I would not even come up with this idea, you know?
how did you come up with this idea? It's amazing.
Yeah.
And
Oh, owner of a fishing boat, why not?
and what's also interesting is, so it seems like absolutely doing the right thing. It is quite a blatant violation of one of the precepts.
Yeah, I think this book has
Yeah.
really been an
Yeah.
interesting insight into times that the precepts. I think when you have a younger mind, a less mature mind, I'll say. I don't know if that's exactly the quite the words I'm looking for. It's easy to see things a little more black and white, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the reality is sometimes things have a gray area, and to know when to use that area in the right way. And I think many times I see Shang Kong doing that, right? In the ultimate pursuit of relieving and eliminating the most suffering in this world, she makes decisions that on the surface are easily labeled like identity fraud. Like,
Yes.
and
Identity fraud with good intention.
yeah, exactly, right? And so if you just said, what would you say about a Buddhist doing identity fraud, even if it's with good intention? You might initially say that's a bad thing.
It depends, yeah. For me personally, when I try to
Right.
uphold the precepts, the five precepts. But for me, it's more important to understand why they exist
Mhm.
than the exact word.
Exactly.
So, like lying, it's like, or exaggerating things. It's like, well, why am I doing that? Am I bringing up an ego? But if it's to go and help somebody, then it's like a wholesome route and so on. And I
Mhm.
don't always do that, but that's the way I interpret them.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just noticed she actually lies like on right on the next page, right?
I think
So
so.
That's
first
true.
of all, she knows that police and pirates are working together. I don't know how you know that, but she does, right?
I
And
just
then
assume she has a vast network of information at all
crazy,
times.
right? So they would literally get killed, right?
Mhm.
She just like does this like little lie and gives a box of like French chocolates, and they escape unharmed. It's just completely crazy.
Yeah. The fact that this woman has lived this long after reading so much of this book is just astounding to me. Like just the fact that she's still alive or not imprisoned permanently.
Yeah.
And I don't know. So that's really interesting.
And on top of that, has now published what she's done. It's like, hey, I
Um
did this.
I don't know if she published this or someone else. I don't really.
Ah, okay.
I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't know. Um. Hi, kitty cat. Suddenly. Um. Anyway. So yeah, the pirates come. Some other stuff goes down. And then this is Bala and I were talking about this earlier. She starts writing 300 letters a week.
Yep.
I am convinced she never sleeps ever. Has never slept. I think she might be a vampire. Uh, she may be vampiric in nature, but at least she's Buddhist, so that's good. Um, so
Vampire
she,
Buddhists will take it.
but she gets clever once again, where she's like, "I'll just make 300 photocopies of this letter, and then add little personal tidbits here and there."
It's got an invented mail merge.
Yeah, pretty much. But
Well, but she still goes out of her way to actually write a personal
yeah,
piece.
she just doesn't rehash the same like basic information of what's going on every time. Of like, here are the updates on what's going on over here, blah blah blah.
Really cool.
Yeah. Rare flowers of the country. Oh, I think this is chapter. I'm hoping this is the chapter that has some absolutely lovely quotes and ideas later in it. I'm. I will hold on that.
Let's get to it. Yeah.
So, here she begins writing back and forth. She becomes inspired to help the creatives of a community, of seeing the artists as these like rare flowers that bloom. And so she becomes kind of like inspired to do that. She starts sending a little aid here and there to have people help struggling writers or poets or artists, which is cool. Hits me right in the artist heart, you know. Like, ah, very sweet. And once again, people are getting arrested, people dying, people getting seized, with their bank accounts getting torn away from them, and just all sorts of crap. It's awful. And then there's some immigration into France happening, and some of the individuals who immigrated to France told her about a lot of what was going on there. She mentions that it feels like the Vietnamese is stepping back in their understanding of medicine and like reverting to these ways and causing more illness and more issue rather than embracing like things that could really be saving lives. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, because it's Western, right?
Mhm.
That's what they're trying to go away from.
We have
Oh yeah.
another. Hmm.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
Yes.
What were you gonna say?
No, I was just going to say the same thing you were going to say.
um. Then we have another instance of some nuns and monks emulating themselves. Um. Which to even like I've tried to meditate on a little bit on what that state of mind would be like of deciding that this was the best decision for the country and the people here. And it's not, I don't know. I don't recommend it. I'm going to say. I'm going to recommend not meditating on that necessarily. Just
Doctor, like, don't set yourself on fire.
yeah.
Doctor's
Yeah.
advice.
Not outside video games, no.
It's interesting to think about because you can have the. I think the danger of it is you could have this despair mindset that leads to it, couldn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
And it becomes suicide with a cause
Mhm.
rather than more about escaping than helping and so on.
Right. It becomes about your own escape versus what it will actually do for the people left behind.
And what could you do if you were still there?
Mhm. Well, and we're presented with that idea earlier on in the book, where her very good like friend that she had been working with made that decision, and she had been asked to join them. And ultimately, what she came up with was like the only thing I can be certain if I did this is that I would be gone. And so she couldn't be certain that there'd be change, that the people she'd been working with would be taken care of, you know? And so those are all incredible decisions to make. And I don't know. It's a really, I don't, like I said, I don't necessarily recommend meditating on it, but I spent a little time with it and it was very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't,
And it
hmm?
makes me think, if a bunch of people stranded on boats starving to death isn't going to make be a red flag to someone, would self-immolation be any more of a red flag to someone?
Mm hmm.
Because if you've got what looks like a quaint society, and suddenly boom, maybe that would at least grab people's attention. Putting aside whether there's a better way to do it, I don't know.
Mm hmm.
Context. But with this,
Well,
if you've got so much death, destruction, and pain already in people's faces, I'm not sure. Just thinking out loud, I'm not sure what it would add, for lack of a better word.
Mm. If it would have the result you were hoping for.
It's sort of,
well,
yeah. It's like, because sometimes it's like you try and shock people into action through
Mm
these
hmm.
grand gestures, but if there's so much shock already around you, are people going to necessarily
Yeah,
notice
it
right
does seem
away?
like perhaps so many people would have been desensitized by this stage that would that actually be helpful?
but in this context, like the war is over, right? And now it's atrocities of the regime. So I could see that making sense in that context. Do you see what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it's not like you're in the middle of the war, right? It's
I mean, I don't know what it was like afterwards,
yeah,
because after effects of war, but sure, there could be some circumstances
yeah,
where.
yeah. So my
Uh,
understanding is that like okay, so if you have like communists getting into power, right?
hmm,
Uh, it's actually a very precarious position to be in, and so they basically have to wipe out any sort of dissent and
Mm-hmm.
really like stomp it out, because otherwise it's game over for them, right? And they know that. So they just committed like horrible atrocities against their own people, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, like and thinking about it as an escape, I don't think that's correct. I think the people are genuinely very convinced that this is the most compassionate thing they can do that will help the most people.
Well, yeah, that's what I absolutely hope and want to believe, but one that
Right.
I don't know.
yeah,
Well,
it
Yeah.
you don't know,
can be that is
but
the
but
issue.
it also it also means that basically their options were so limited at that point.
Right,
Hmm.
that this might have been
Right.
their like we got to do something. This is the only thing that might have a chance of getting to them and
Hmm.
Yeah.
which I can't
I'm
imagine
not here
even being in
to.
that position, right? Where you're so desperate to make a statement to the people who need to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not here
Oh,
to
the
critique what
situation.
they did without context. I'm
Mhm.
saying, if we generalize this to the world, like I'm in the UK, if I did that in the UK, I mean, it would grab attention, and then the news would move on.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
It
it's
would
very
move on.
if you've got no other options, then maybe that is genuinely the thing. Thankfully, in the
Mhm.
UK, we have options for a lot of things.
well. The crazy thing here is that the news actually didn't get out.
Mhm.
Really?
Like the 12 people died, and this was somebody who brought that news out of Vietnam.
Right.
And it continues on. They were basically trying to prove this story to be true, so they
Mhm.
have like enough of a case to actually publish that. And finally, they succeed at publishing this a year later.
Mhm.
A year later, actually the West learns about this.
Yeah.
So you can imagine like how tough the regime has cracked down on any information flows when 12 people burn
Mm.
themselves to death and nobody knows.
Yes. So much stuff happens. Ugh.
there's a nice little closing point, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was really poignant of a to have it there at the end. So I
So,
highlighted it.
from because you've read this in more detail than what,
Mhm.
um,
I do recommend reading it. There's really touching segments we just
It
kind of glossed
we
over.
we did.
mhm.
But there it is worth sitting down and this is a so one of my favorite quotes I got years ago was about how some books are worth tasting, some books are worth devouring, and some books are worth like a casual nibble, right? And this is definitely a book that's worth devouring in its entirety and really chewing on and spending time with it.
Mhm.
Um, because it's such a human story, right? So obviously, there's a lot to be had in texts like the sutras or really reading other parts, like real the texts. I don't know what to call them. I'm sorry. I'm very poorly vocabularied.
Mhm.
But when I read stories like this, they sink a little deeper for me because of how human they are and how firsthand they feel.
They're
Yes.
going through dealing with real world problems that are very difficult,
Hmm.
and it's actually happening rather than some hypothetical or whatever.
Right. So I'm just saying, I think this book's totally worth sitting down with and really reading if you get the chance.
Yeah, it's not a matter of whether it's worth reading for me; it's where it sits in the queue. Um,
Absolutely. I have
yeah,
that queue as
Hello.
well.
I've
I
got
just
200 books next to me
I
queued at the moment.
I have the I'm gonna call it the privilege of
Mhm.
being the person who leads book club here. So this just automatically forces me to read books out of obligation.
I get what you mean. Yeah,
Like I like
it's
reading them and I
good
enjoy
social
it,
pressure.
but it's nice that I also have a sense of responsibility to read the book. Like, because if I came to book club and said, "Sorry guys, I didn't read the book this week,"
Yes.
that would be kind of weird.
Like,
On on
I
that
read the
note,
book because I didn't. Okay.
yeah, please someone else. But on that note, what would you say, like in terms of practical things that people can change about the way they live, or think about, or meditate on? What do you think you would extract from these chapters, or even the book,
Oh, from these chapters.
or even the book as a whole, if that's too
Oh my gosh,
specific?
the book is such. If you really look in the text, I am a firm believer, and I say this so often here. I think is that there is so much truth hidden in the pages of so many books. To limit
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to a certain like world of texts, I think is unnecessary. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think the inverse tangent. The inverse can be true too, right? Everything you need can probably just be found in a small selection of texts. But I love seeing truth come out in so many pages in so many different people's experiences. I think it's beautiful. And so this book really, I think if you read it with a very open heart, can reveal how worthwhile it can be to have a regular practice, to have a walking meditation that you can rely on, or your breathing.
Mm-hmm.
That reliance on your practice can have such a impact on the calm and the insight and the wisdom that you can approach difficult situations. Um, and how that can open your heart to the needs of the many, right? And so from this book, I see a great practice for helping people while also respecting the limitations of those doing the helping.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I will. I will. Let me actually do this as I speak. Put it on mute.
Actually, Becky, the book actually reminded me of you, surprisingly enough, because I think a while ago you mentioned that you really recommend focusing, let's say, just on the Four Noble Truths, right? And
I did say that to you once,
you did say that.
with
And
some
so
context, but yeah,
what?
with some context. I wouldn't say just as in exclusively, but if you
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
started for you personally, it seems to
Sorry,
fit
sorry.
your
Of
Yeah.
course.
persona.
There's always context. Yes, yes. But the point is like so this book is about a lot of suffering,
Hmm.
right? And like I'm reading it, I'm like, what am I annoyed here with, right? Like I got a sandwich from a gas station and there was not enough mayo in it. And it really irked me, right?
Oh, perspective. Yes.
Perspective, absolutely. Absolutely. Or it actually maybe even helped me understand my grandma because she lived through World War II
Hmm.
Hmm.
and she would constantly return in her mind to like all these like things that happened in the past. And I just thought it was just like that she likes to torture herself, but maybe she just tried to keep the context like alive and not forget,
And
Hmm.
right?
keep
Because
the context for learning.
this is reality, right? Like these things happened. This is how the world is, right?
Yeah.
That's don't forget it.
Be hard to see when it's like in a history book and you're taught it as history and people think, oh yeah, but that's history, right?
It's no history. This is
Exactly.
still the present, right?
Exactly.
Even now. So yeah, that's kind of what I take from it.
Hmm. That's good.
Wunderbar. I have added a book to my wish list.
Good. Um,
Oh,
I think chapter
yay.
19 gets into the Plum Village more, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
That's
start having
something that just like blew my mind. Like
it.
the prices at which they are buying the land, and that
Oh
they
my
have like
gosh.
old French like stone buildings and like
Hmm.
all this stuff. Like Jesus Christ, this is awesome. Yeah.
It feels nice because it feels like a win after we're presented with so many times that there's no winning.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
um, it sounds like a really beautiful area, and
Hey,
would love to
I'm
visit.
sorry, the dog is going crazy.
um, they they just do a lovely job. Anyway, this is kind of weird to talk about because it is worth reading, but it's weird to have a discussion about. You know what I mean? Um, and then they start talking about the retreats that they begin to offer for people and how revitalized people seem to be after spending 2 or 3 weeks in the village, which totally vibes with what I know about people. So it sounds awesome. Would you spend 3 weeks in a village uh, away from everything, I guess?
I would love to do that.
I think it sounds
It
Same
great.
with
just
a
sounds,
but.
yeah.
My son is always anchoring me to where I live. But
Yeah.
perhaps I could go for 3 weeks and then come back and see him after, something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
I don't have a son. I just have like endless critters milling around. So it's a similar situation.
Yeah, you've got responsibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also this book does a great job of a reality check for people who think that to walk the path correctly, you got to give up this and that and you've got to go away. So even though we're presented with this lovely place that the narrator goes to and lives in, she's often drawn back to places and goes there and does work or sees family or so it's not that she goes and lives on a stone top hill and never speaks to another human soul again, right? That doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Not
no,
really a
no.
connected Dharma, then, is it?
Exactly. I don't know. So it's just interesting because I think, um, at least here in the U.S., raised in with cartoons, as it were, you get an idea of what it means to be a monk or a nun, and it doesn't seem social.
See it like a sort of Christian monastic, I
Mhm.
guess, with a very isolated community. At least that's a stereotype that I've internalized for that.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe that's wrong. I like when I was reading some earlier sutras and so on about how to run a Sangha and how to run a monastery and so on,
Mhm.
it was talking about the way it's designed is to make sure that the monks go out and they engage with the lay people over and over again and depend on them, which is, for example, the reason they are supposed to go out and beg for food each day
Hmm.
because it stops them becoming scholarly, isolated communities out of touch with the world.
Right.
And this forces them to be grateful for people rather than seeing themselves as above the lay people.
Yeah.
It's
Humbles
even
them.
more
Yeah.
Mm.
because they have to conduct themselves in a way that lay people want to give them food,
Mhm.
Also true, yeah.
right? It's not just being in contact, like that I think forms their practice, in a particular direction.
Yeah, that's
Um
definitely going to have an effect. Motivating through someone's need to eat.
Yeah.
so someone posted a video earlier, it was yesterday or this morning, and it was a video about a master teacher talking about Buddha beads.
I saw it.
During the video, he talked about it's great. I think it's great people are wearing them because when people see you wearing them, they're gonna help you make sure that you're acting correctly, right? Like they're gonna check you a little bit, and I think um, what you're talking about is very similar. And then in addition, Sean Khan talks about later when she does complete kind of becoming a nun, she shaves her head, dons the robes, and such. That it not only changes it transforms her relationship with people on the outside a little bit, and it keeps her in check to remind her of what her actions need to be saying to everybody, and
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
You represent this.
you represent this. Yeah.
She explains her reasons for not doing it before,
Mhm.
but then she says also she's sorry she hasn't done it earlier because not only it helps her, like herself, but it also gives her words more weight, and
Mhm.
she has actually more effect on the community just by doing that.
Yeah. So I don't know. That was just interesting to think about, and it felt related to your discussion of having them go out in the community and interact regularly.
Yeah, the it can work two ways with social pressure, but in a positive way. Like
Mhm.
you gonna behave yourself now, monk, right?
Um, so one of the things I liked was she was reflecting on adults and children came to Plum Village often, and she said it
Mm.
turns out that many children practice mindfulness better than their parents. And when they return home, they remind their parents to come back to the present moment and enjoy the many wonders that are all around them. I think that's really sweet. Um, I think there's the potential there for them to be better at it because I feel like there's just less in their heads to confuse them. You know, I've got a few
Sure.
decades in my brain versus maybe a single decade.
Less social conditioning and so on.
The
Because
thing
Yeah.
you
is,
look at a lot of kids playing, and they they don't look like they're thinking about tomorrow or
Mhm.
yesterday. They look like they're just playing there and then.
Mhm.
Something
Exactly.
goes wrong along the way. Well, I say wrong. Learning to plan for the future is helpful, but we go a bit overboard.
Right.
I can't remember for the life of me. Did Buddha do something like that, or somebody? I remember reading somewhere that somebody started doing meditation, remembering like a particular childhood thing when they were like waiting for father or something. Was it Buddha? Do you know what I'm talking
This sounds
about?
like yes, it sounds very familiar. I don't know if it was
Yeah,
like Gautama Buddha or whatever, but it sounds
yeah.
like a parable I've heard before.
I have this like Buddhist salad in my head, and
Buddhist
eventually it
salad.
will sort itself
Yes.
out, but not for now. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I, d- I don't think it matters super much, but
Right.
uh, it's all fiber.
Yeah.
Help help with your bowel movements.
Buddhist fiber.
You gotta take your fiber.
I thought you said fiver. Like,
No,
well, enlighten me for a fiver online. I don't know.
no, no, fiber for your Buddhist digestive tract.
Ah, okay, mental fiber.
Yeah,
Cool.
mental
For your
fiber.
local intestine.
So I thought that was really sweet little moment. Like this is a lovely little. It's a quiet moment in this book of like tragedy and obstacles, right?
Yeah, this was very pleasant to read.
Mm-hmm. It was a brain bleach, I think the kids say. What I don't know.
Rain bleach?
Eye bleach.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Oh, like the Reddit subreddit,
Yeah.
purifying things.
Purifying your mind a little bit, like a palate cleanser. There we go. That's the word I was looking
Yeah.
for. Palate cleanser.
Rain wasabi.
Oh, really intense for a moment, then you go back.
Yeah. Here at the beginning of chapter 22, it's really sweet. They're continuing to talk about the village just a little bit, and this little tree this kid planted, and hey, do you remember doing this? These plum trees now feed people when you wanted to take. They started when you wanted to take care of people, and I thought it was really sweet. So, but then we start getting into this like really in-depth insight into like these three kids' lives, and she begins to do an interesting comparing and contrast of kids raised in a more Vietnamese culture versus kind of just tangentially being taught about it because that's where they're from, if that makes sense. And
Yep. Mhm.
so it was just an interesting look into that dynamic. And then we are presented. I didn't know where this was going, but it got kind of sad.
It was sad, yeah.
And so then these two kids, they're so young and the way they write that it just blows the narrator's mind, that the kids can talk this way about how they feel about Vietnam and about these banned books and all these other things. And then their mom gets sick and they have to begin taking care of her and doing the work. And it's just, I thought this was interesting. So one of the kids uses an old little folk saying of an old mother is like a ripe banana hanging on the tree as she begins to talk about her mother's illness. And she relates this to Shang Kong, and Shang Kong reflects that no one had to teach this image to her. It was born from her own experience and her own insight. And I thought her musings on this were really interesting. I don't know. This whole little section is kind of it's really different from the rest of the book, but it's interesting.
Well, she realizes that the culture and the place shapes the people in a particular way.
Mhm.
And then she sees that it's not possible to do it for the children who grow up abroad, even though the parents try to kind of like keep this idea alive, they can't really transmit it.
Mhm.
And contrasted with the children that actually grew in that culture and it's just natural for them.
Yeah. She brings up this phrase a lot of river water and market rice, right? Of being
Mhm.
there, drinking the water, and eating the rice from the market. Pure water and rice, like good books, have been banned to make room for water and rice that make little Xiao feel like as if she has eaten tasteless, dry manioc root. And so that was an interesting insight to the way the culture was being shifted by the government and stuff. And I don't know, it was just really, it was
It
an
was interesting. It's a form of attachment, right?
mm-hmm.
But it's sort of like a virtuous attachment, if there's even a thing like that ever. Like she's probably sorry that the kids don't get to learn these things that are very important,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, like she paid dearly for that. So yeah, what do you do?
I think in some ways we see her beginning to release it just a bit, that attachment, as she talks about um, that she begins to see them as Vietnamese trees growing in the gardens of the world, right? She begins to
Hmm.
talk about them as, really brightening these gardens with a little bit of the Vietnamese culture with them.
Hmm.
So I thought that was really sweet.
Also, keep in mind for context that she cannot get back, right?
Mhm.
Cannot return. So I'm not surprised she feels this way.
Mhm. And then there was this little quote that I thought was interesting.
Uh, yeah.
A fragrant rose and a heap of garbage are two sides of one living reality. Looking deeply into a rose, I can see the garbage. Looking deeply into the garbage, I can see a rose. It will bloom very soon. When I look anywhere, I see flowers and garbage deeply interconnected. This is necessary for life to be. I vibed
Yes,
with that.
I did, but in a negative way. I use
Aw.
the word garbage a lot. That's my favorite word, and I was like, this is like something I would have written, and I'm like, this should have been more skillful. Can you say something else? But okay.
Okay, fine. It's your book.
I just imagine this like Swift teachers like this is garbage and that is garbage and Rose is garbage and
Ah,
I know it's not meant that way, right? But I was
yeah.
like, yeah, it was funny.
I don't know. I think it just very much shouts the same like no mud, no lotus concepts, right? Of you can't have the lotus flower without the mud that it grows in.
This is so much more beautiful way of expressing this idea, right? Like
Mhm.
why garbage if we can have mud, right? It's
Because they're
It's the same thing in a different set of words.
I don't know. It's interesting. I kind of love it. I really do. I just
all
instantly love
right.
it because I'm going to tell you it was deeply it resonated with me because I now live in Philadelphia and
Okay.
there is so much garbage on the ground that I'm having to learn to see around it or into it, if you will. You know what I mean? That
Yep.
if I don't want to just feel like I'm surrounded by trash, I have to see past it. And it's really interesting because I live in not the prettiest part of town. And so I don't know, it's just interesting. So that's why it's like I think I connected to this pretty hard is because I had been reflecting recently on the garbage that accumulates in life and sometimes on street corners.
I'm very happy for you.
Thank you. um. Oh, here we go. This was. She reflected on there wasn't enough people who know that if we hurt others, we are only hurting ourselves, and that to find when war and dictatorship are so prolonged. So I know. I think you're saying. I think you said the war was over at this point, but I think for her the war is still going. And for very much these people that in some ways there's so much discontent and everything's still going. I don't actually remember the exact dates of the war.
I think 1975 it ended.
Ah.
So then basically the dictatorship and the whole regime thing started.
Mhm. Right,
Uh,
right. So while there's not an active war, there's still struggle and still.
I mean, we had the same thing in Czechoslovakia, right? Like you couldn't do certain kinds of art or have certain kinds of opinions, right? And in theory, people were going and voted,
Mhm.
right? But if you didn't vote communist,
Yeah.
you are in trouble, like big
Oh.
right? So yay, democracy, stuff like that. So and there were like a whole, like our first president was suffering through this quite severely, right? Like um, there were many people died, of course, right?
Mhm.
Like there would be people who they called them meant designated for liquidation, I think. There's a Czech term for that, right? And they would
Mhm.
basically send you to uranium mines, and it's like, no, just work here, you'll die. That's the plan, right?
That's the plan.
And stuff like that, right? So, yeah, yeah, suffering didn't end for sure.
Mhm. I
It
am
reminds. Go on.
tempted to uh have
Yeah.
us meet again to talk about chapters 21 through 23 only because we are now coming up on an hour.
Hmm.
Sounds good.
So
Maybe we could roll them together with, I don't know, how many more chapters are there?
there is one one more meeting after this, which is 24 through 25. So that's what I think I'm going to do is we'll save discussion for 21 through 23 and add it to 24 and 25. And then
Perfect.
I think that'll be a better chunk. I don't know why I broke it up the way I did.
And that will finish the book.